dedicated mainly to a very important god, Osiris. But unlike most Egyptian temples, he added lots of chapels for other gods and goddesses too. So the temple mainly dedicated to one god, Osiris, and Osiris was a very important god. He was the god of the dead. And when we mention Osiris, as Dr. Robert said before, it is a very good time to know about the great myth of Osiris, Isis, and Horus and Seth. And this is because this is one of the most important mythology or myth that the ancient Egyptians ever invented. And lots in the Egyptian religion based on that story. Now the difference, it's not story. In my opinion, the story is something maybe happen or it will happen in the future when you tell it. But myth didn't happen. They very much invented it for the people to learn from it, to tell them something important. So the myth started when the gods decided to send 4 gods to earth, to people, to teach all the people civilization. Now I say civilization, that means they came when the people did not know much about how to build a civilization. When I say civilization, I mean farming the land, I mean weaving, building houses, all of that. Those gods were related to each other, like brothers and sisters. It was Osiris and Isis, right? Male and female, and then we have also Seth and Nephthys. And it is like in the story, in the myth. By the way, we have more than one version for this story. So this is the one I like more than all of them. Anyway, it's going to get more excited, by the way. So listen now. Osiris is very active. He likes people. And that's why he started to teach them civilization. And then his brother is not. And that is why ended up that the Egyptians love Osiris the most. And they don't care about Seth, who became very jealous from his brother Osiris. And that's why deep down he wanted to get rid of him. The myth said also that was the beginning to teach the Egyptian civilization. And then the rest of the story is Osiris will leave Egypt to teach the rest of the world. And it is like the Egyptians on purpose want to say civilization started here and then it spread out. And then Osiris leaves Egypt and then he went all over the world, and then later he comes back very tired. When he comes back, he became much more popular and famous, and all the people are waiting for him, which made his brother Seth evil more jealous. And that is why he is waiting until his brother sleeps. And then he came to him and he took the exact measurements of his body. And then he designed a box according to the size of the body of Osiris. And then he made it so beautiful, from the most beautiful precious stones you can imagine. And he hides it in his house. And then he announced about a banquet and a party in his house. And he invited his good friends and also Osiris as well. When they went there after dinner, he shows the box and everybody loved it. He said, "Oh my God, we haven't seen anything like that before." He said it's a gift for whom it fits. And then they try one by one and it doesn't fit. Kind of Cinderella story. And if it doesn't fit, you go, you leave. Until Osiris, the last one, get in and it fits very fast. He got the lid, put it on the top, and he ties it up. And then he left his brother in this box until the morning. And Osiris dies in the morning. He dies. Took the whole box, threw it in the Nile. And then the water took it from the south all the way to the north, and it was stuck in the Mediterranean, and then it went to Lebanon now. And it was stuck in one tree from the cedar tree, which after a while started to grow up on it. And then the king of Lebanon is about to build a palace. He is sending his own carpenters all over the country to get the best trees that they can use for the palace. They found this beautiful tree, they cut it off, and then they made it as a pillar. Right? So as we always say, it ended up that Osiris became hidden in a box, in a pillar, in a palace in Lebanon. Hidden in a box, in a pillar, in a palace in Lebanon. And then Isis, the loyal wife, is looking for him all over. And then it's a long story. Somehow she knew where he is, and then she went to the queen of Lebanon, and then after that he went to the king and they told him the story. And the king believed them. And that is why he came to this pillar and he cut it off. And they found Osiris in the box. They took him back. For the Egyptians, that's a sign of two things. If you die in a coffin, like Osiris. And if you die outside, you have to come back. Right? So they took his body and they brought him back He wanted to make a big funeral, and the whole Egyptians are waiting for that. And his brother still jealous. He doesn't want him to come back. So he hides in the marshes of Delta, waiting for the right moment to attack. And then he attacked them, and this time he hijacked the body one more time. And he decided to hack the body in pieces, into almost 14 pieces, threw it all over Egypt. Right? And Isis is very annoyed, but in the same time she's a loyal wife, and she's looking for her husband all over. She found from the 14 pieces 13. The penis or the phallus was missing, right? And in one of the versions it says it was eaten by 3 different fish. All right, and that is why I notice myself, as I always tell my people, you will never find fish on the offering table will be given for gods. Egyptians ate fish; they have no problem. They were fishing too, but you will never find them give offerings for any god has fish on it. Since then, it became very much like a bad sign. You don't give it to gods because it ate the phallus of Osiris. Okay? But this time, Isis wanted to take revenge. And that's why the first thing she did, she collected all the pieces and she made artificial phallus for Osiris. And then the reason why she did that, because she wanted to have a son from Osiris. So the only way to do that is to impregnate herself. So the Egyptians are not very good in sexual scenes, by the way. So and that's what you will see in this temple, by the way. They show Isis as very much like a bird. We call it the kite bird. She flies on the top of the phallus of Osiris, which is erected already. And that's how she impregnated herself. And then she mummified Osiris to become first mummy in history. And that's why everybody should be mummified, because Osiris was mummified. So they mummified him, and then he became the god of the dead, and that is why he became very important god. All right? Horus grows up, and then he was given wings by gods so he can chase him. And then he is chasing him all over Egypt, and in more than one temple, they show Seth convert his body into a hippo, and then he hides in the Nile until Horus was able to arrest him. And then at the end of the story, after lots of chasing and all of that, he was able to arrest him, but you cannot kill him. At this time, all the gods gathered and they decided to take him from earth back to the sky. And then he becomes the god of wind. And they said, remember, because I have to mention something about that too. I was about to forget it. He becomes the god of wind. And they said, this who shall thunder in the sky. The god of the storm, the god of the storm. And that means it is not a very easy job, by the way, too. Seth was not always bad, by the way. In some tombs in the Valley of the Kings, they show him in front of boats, and he is the one to defend all gods. And it is like at some point you need him. Even if he's evil, he's the strongest one who can defend other gods in front of bad things or bad creatures. So he was not bad all the time, but he was picked up to be the god of the storm. And this is almost the end of the story. And this is almost how the ancient Egyptians were able to say, we were able to control evil. You cannot get rid of it. You cannot kill him. Sometimes you need it, but it's under control. Right? The reason why I said we need to say the god of the storm, because one of the very strange things, the name of the king who built this temple. Now, the temple was built by Seti the First, who's the father of Ramses the Great. So we found both names, Seti the First and Ramses the Great. So the question is, Seti means the beloved of Seth. How you say I'm the beloved of the evil god? This is not a good name. You know, after I researched and then I read a lot of articles, I noted that some archaeologists think that the family of Ramses are not original Egyptians. They're Canaanites. They came from Canaan. And in Canaan, there's a very strong god for the storm. Everybody love there. His name is Baal. If you hear about the name, Baal. And we think when this family came, Baal was still very important god, and they're looking for another god equivalent. That was Seth. So they named their son Seti, the beloved of Seth. And I think that was enough reason for Seti, that when he grew up and he became the pharaoh, to build this temple, to say, I am not against Osiris, boys and girls. My name is the beloved of Seth, but I love Osiris. And that's why he came here and he built the greatest temple ever built for Osiris. All right? Now remember also that this family took over and they were not supposed to be kings. The father of Seti, who was Ramses first. So we have Ramses I, we have Seti, and Ramses II, Ramses the Great, right? Ramses I had no royal blood. And he comes right after the family of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. And in my opinion, here is what happened. Akhenaten took over, and he doesn't give his stability to Egypt. Stability happens in two ways, by the way, in ancient Egypt. Number one, if you are a powerful pharaoh and you can take care of the country, right, and keep the religion and keep the upper and lower Egypt united, this is all your mission. Number two, when you give the Egyptians succession, a strong son, that gives stability. Now Akhenaten did not do both, because he changed religion and he didn't care about the country. And number two, his son was only 8 years old, and that is why there was kind of instability. Egypt was not stable. Then Tutankhamun took over. And then Tutankhamun also is young, he couldn't control, and at the same time, he doesn't have a son. So no stability. Now who took over after that? One of the generals of the army, doesn't have a son, very old man. And he dies after 2 years. Doesn't give Egypt stability. Who took over after that? Another general called Hur-Muheb. And he doesn't have a son too, so he didn't give Egypt stability. At the end of Hur-Muheb, they had to choose somebody to give Egypt stability. And they choose Ramses I. He is one of the generals of the army, strong, and he has a son and a grandson. He has Seti and Ramses too. And that's why this family took over, and later they became one of the greatest family we ever had in Egypt. And Seti built this, and then after that Ramses built a lot, and Ramses became the legendary of Egypt. This is what I want to say, except one last thing I like to say, because usually when I mention Ramses, people ask why Ramses special. Ramses the Great is great because he ruled Egypt again 67 years. We think when he died, when he was almost 94 years old. Right? We found his name almost everywhere. Start from Nubia, where Abu Simbel is, passing by Aswan, and then when you go also to Luxor, and then even we found his name on Giza Plateau, believe it or not, and then we found his name a lot in Memphis City, and then we found his name a lot in Lower Egypt. He's very much like a ghost. But one of his bad habits, if he finds anything, as Dr. Robert mentioned, belong to any other pharaoh, he erased the name from the cartouche and write down his name. And because he was a great builder in the same time, every single Egyptologist considered him the greatest builder. I am the only one who consider him the greatest chiseler. He chiseled a lot of names to write his name in instead. So Ramses was a legendary. One of the things, by the way, I think you can notice this. You can notice like one side here, one part here is kind of carving, and then it's kind of white, and then it's kind of dark, and then it's kind of white. This is because at the end of this temple, we have 7 chapels for seven different gods. And we think on purpose, Seti built the temple and he left an entrance leading to each chapel. All right? And then Ramses himself came and he blocked it. So he can have more surface to write nice things about himself. That is Ramses. Always want to write something about himself because he was the greatest builder and the greatest chiseler in the same time. Right? Dr. Robert mentioned that this is maybe one of the most, lots of Egyptologists agree about that. It is maybe the most beautiful temple in Egypt when it comes to colors and inscriptions. Just an amazing quality, Some archaeologists, I heard one of them said, the reason why maybe those guys made a beautiful temple because those are the hands of the artist who've been left over from the time of Akhenaten. Remember when I said Akhenaten gave freedom to the whole artist? Right? Which project that you think is a big project was built after? Tutankhamun built nothing almost, and then I did not have time to build Hur-Muheb. So those people did not kind of participate in a big project before this temple was built. So this is the first big project ever built after Akhenaten and Tutankhamun time. And it is like all of these art was still here, so they used them to build one of the most beautiful temples. And that's why the quality of the carving and the colors much more beautiful than any other temple in all of Egypt. Right?
So these carvings aren't original to the construction of this temple? They came
All original.
afterwards?
No. Ramses right almost at the time of his father. He's even sharing the throne with him.
when he was young. So it is almost around the same time. Dr. Robert, you want to add something?
Yeah. So a couple of things. And when you look at the carvings, I think you might be able to see how it's not in that Akhenaten style, but it's still really beautiful. It's very sort of, to my mind, some of the carvings in there, they're not as, as stiff and formal as some of the other Egyptian carvings that you see. So sort of a transition, I would say, from Akhenaten style into later styles. And we'll see, if you look at it, you can see the transitions, I think, as we go through different periods, different styles. A couple of other things I just wanted to emphasize and mention. The whole Osiris cycle, Osiris, Set, Horus, etc. I want to re-emphasize how that ties in and sort of was adopted, I would say, parts of it by Christianity and later religions. Also think about the coffin being put into the Nile and flowed. Does that sound like something familiar with Moses and the Israelites? And so I think there are a lot of ties here, a lot of connections, even if it's simply that these stories were being passed down and then sort of reworked and reanalyzed by later cultures, or readopted by cultures. Because Moses was a supposedly Egyptian prince. You've all seen, I think, probably 10 Commandments, and we talked about this before, that Ramesses the Great and Seti, his father, they played that role in the 1956 movie, I think it was. Don't quote me on that date. But Moses with Charlton Heston, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing I want to keep in mind. The other two things I want to point out, and we'll look at as we go through, is we go through this temple, and then out the back door, so to speak, is a passage with the king's list. So very important, king's list. We've mentioned that before. Muhammad was mentioning that before, with the chronology of the kings up to the time of Seti and Ramesses, with a few missing because they didn't want to include them, like Akhenaten and Hatshepsut. So we'll see the king's list, and then you go out back, and there's the Osirion. So the Osirion, in my assessment, is very, very important. People argue about exactly what the Osirion is and how far back it goes. I'll give you my assessment. Well, the Osirion, and Muhammad will correct me if he has a different opinion, but my understanding is that one of the myths, one of the legends, was that the head of Osiris was actually found here, when he was cut up into 14 pieces, and that the Osirion, according to one tradition, is where his head was buried. You will see that it is many meters below the level of this temple, the basic ground plan of this temple. We're walking, as we go in here, we're walking on the level that the New Kingdom Egyptians would have walked, say 1300 or so before the Common Era. So we're walking at that level, but when we go out to the Sirion, you'll see that it looks like it's a hole in the ground. It actually is a hole in the ground, if you would. And you'll also see that it's a very different architectural style than the other things that we've seen, with the exception of, remember the Valley Temple next to the Sphinx? And we'll go back, we'll see the Sphinx again. It seems very similar to many people stylistically to that, because you have these huge granite blocks that are very smooth, almost nothing on them, but I'll come to that in a second. They're set in the ground, there are niches, etc. So one suggestion, which I think is quite credible, is that this temple was being founded and built on a holy site, one that was already holy, as many sites are, and as they were building it, to put it crudely, they ran into the earlier site and then incorporated into it, but earlier, and we know earlier because stratigraphically it's much lower, the Nile silts had come in and filled around it, so that they were finding a much, much earlier site, which I think goes back, really early to the period I've been talking about for the Sphinx and that this was only reinforced that yes, they were in the right spot, they were in the right sacred site, that this was a holy shrine on many levels over many, many thousands of years. Am I making sense, everyone? And yes, yes, I would date that potentially back to the same date as the origins of the Sphinx and the Valley Temple, and again, being reused, re-elaborated upon, being incorporated into, reappropriated, just like we do in America. When I say big, but in America, you have older structures that you then rebuild, you build around, and you memorialize them, that type of thing. The other thing I want to point out is that on the Syrian, we'll talk about this all more as we get there, but since we're nicely here as a group, on the Syrian, you have the flower of life. Does everyone know the flower of life? They were selling copies of it around here. You can get t-shirts with it, etc. There are several flowers of life on those Syrian. They're sort of scratched or etched into it. When they were done, I don't know. I don't know if Muhammad has any opinion on that. But to the best of my knowledge, this is the original site, the oldest that we know of. Flower of Life is so popular now among some people around the world. This is where it comes from. And you'll see on the pillars, they're etched on. There's several of them. There's a couple next to each other, and another one. There's a few other etchings of a boat is on the pillars, etc., etc. I don't know, Muhammad. I don't know if they'll be able to walk down into it or not. Sometimes it fills with water, and
No,
sometimes
they closed it and all of
they
it.
closed it. So we'll just look at from the
From the top.
From the top.
I hope you can see it because it's hidden a little bit. I'm talking about the flower of life.
We may or may not. Actually, I think we can, depending on where we can stand on the top, we can point it out.
If we can,
If
yes.
we can, we'll see. But that's where the flower of life, the whole concept comes from. And so many people have made so many, they've written whole books about just the flower of life.
I have a question regarding the King's List that's here. I understand that some of the King's List present a timeline that goes much further back.
Some of them do. This particular one, I don't believe does, but some of the papyrus and help me, Muhammad, the stone.
The Lerma stone.
Yeah.
We'll talk about this
Palermo
inside because
stone
I want
goes
to,
right back.
yeah.
Now, this also includes a number of gods and shrines.
Not this one, but the other one on the papyrus.
Yeah.
Because this is one of the main sources of our knowledge about kings, the king's list. In fact, we found 7 in all of Egypt, not just one. This is the one that is still confined on the temple until today. Most of the other ones have been taken and they are outside of Egypt. And the most incredible one and the biggest one was found on a papyri. We'll talk about this when we go there. I mean, because you need to see it, and then I will tell you the rest of it.
Yeah, the Turin papyrus.
The Turin papyrus.
The Turin papyrus, which, lists all these. We'll talk about that there. And that, it's a Turin papyrus, I think she's thinking of, that lists supposed kings back into.
All of them, by the way, all of them, this is, the idea we think is very much like the king want to put his name in between the great ancestors he had. He want to show himself as a great pharaoh like the other pharaohs he had. And that's why he gave them prayers, he gave them very much kind of mentioning their names, and then he put his name at the end of the list to say, I am the last one of this great tree of kings. And that's why all of them started with lots of kings that were ahead of the king for maybe hundreds of years. And that's why it became very much the main source of our knowledge about kings. Now we know who the king, and let's go inside to talk about it. It's better.